Good evening, everybody. This is Doug Fink. I organize the New York City PowerShell group, and tonight we have Jeff Hicks, who's going to be talking about teaching PowerShell. I'm excited to have him, and I really appreciate that he took the time out to set up a presentation for all this. I'm very much looking forward to it. And before we get started, just a few things. So Sapien Technologies is the company that sponsors this meetup. And I just wanted to take a look at a couple of their products. These products are quite excellent, help you with productivity and building your PowerShell stuff, as well as they have other tools like Primal SQL and Primal XML. And if you go to www.sapien.com, they give you free access to a fully functional trial for 45 days. Highly recommend checking that out. So for your needs. Also, next month, we're going to have Adam Driscoll come on, and he's going to talk about his product called PowerShell Universal. He's going to take us on a tour. You don't want to miss that, so you want to jump onto the meetup.com page, click the RSVP button, and get all the details and the links for the virtual meetup there. And I just want to take a quick look. If you go to youtube.com, Doug Fink, D-O-U-G-F-I-N-K-E, go on there, hit the subscribe button, hit the notify bell, and I'll be posting these videos from these talks up there, as well as I put up different videos that I record. The latest one I put up was called the PowerShell command line tool that I'm building that interacts with Jupyter notebooks. I've got a 5-minute or 10-minute video on that. I'll be putting up more about those things, other PowerShell topics. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, again, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification button. So with that, I'll let Jeff Hicks introduce himself. As you heard us chatting, we've been MVPs for for more than a decade. We've been around the PowerShell space. And also just as a note, at the end of tonight, I forgot to mention this, we'll stop the recording towards when Jeff finishes his presentation, and then stick around so you can put your name in the chat, and then Jeff's gonna raffle off 3 items that you can win for free. For his ebooks that he has and a couple of more other things. So you definitely want to hang around for that. On that note, Jeff, you want to share and take over?
Okay, doke. Let me grab screen to share.
Great, I can see that.
All right. Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you might be. Tonight, I wanted to talk about something that I've been doing, well, as Doug kind of intimated, since the days of PowerShell version 1, and that is teaching PowerShell. So this is something that's really important to me, and I have spent the last 14 years teaching people literally around the world on how to learn and use PowerShell. So I've learned quite a bit, and I want to share some of those experiences with you so that maybe you can get in and teach PowerShell. And we'll talk a bit about what that really means. For those of you who maybe don't know who I am a longtime IT pro. I started back in the days of DOS 3.3, batch files, VBScript, then PowerShell, lots of Microsoft infrastructure stuff. So I've been an IT pro for a very long time. I'm also one of the original PowerShell MVPs. I've been doing community things for a very long time, and Microsoft has been kind enough to recognize those contributions. Many of you probably know that I write a lot of books and courseware. I have authored a number of things with Don Jones, almost always on PowerShell. And I also teach. I do private classes. I do courses for Pluralsight. I write books like the PowerShell Practice Primer because I want to help people learn PowerShell because I know it will make their life and their job much easier. So what I want to talk about here is an idea that kind of teaching and learning are really 2 sides of the same coin. So I'm going to be talking about teaching PowerShell, but really this could also apply to learning PowerShell. Now, one of the drawbacks to these Zoom meetings is I can't see anyone, so I'm hoping I'm going to connect with some of you. And I have no way really of knowing how advanced some of you are in your PowerShell journey, how many of you are just kind of getting started. So hopefully you'll find something in my talk that will kind of resonate with you. So teaching and learning, really, there's two sides of the same coin. Now, before I get too far into this, I also want to stress that when I talk to people and talk about what I do, I refer to myself as a teacher, not a trainer. Because really there is a difference, in my opinion, between teaching someone and training someone. When you train someone, that implies kind of a rote method to do something. I remember back in the days when NT first came out, and I went to a training class because I had to learn what order to put the diskettes in, what values to put in when I was prompted. You had to follow a set process in order to get Windows NT installed. If you didn't follow that process, it wasn't going to work. So that was very much being trained. You can only do what you're trained to do. So if something had gone wrong in that installation process, I'd be really out of luck. I'd have to try to find, and this was all pre-Google days, try to find someone say, hey, I have this error. I don't understand what's going on. I don't know what to do next. So training, while it's useful in many cases, there are some limitations to that. To me, teaching implies learning something at a deeper level. You can do more with it because you know how to learn. I personally don't want to train someone in PowerShell to say, oh, if you need to get the services on a computer, type get service dash computer, and then you have these other little bonus things you can do. That's training them to do a task. I want to focus, and what I'd like you to think about when it comes for you to teach PowerShell is to teach what's really happening. When I run get service, what's really happening under the hood? Some of you, I'm sure most of you have heard the adage, teach a man to fish. And that's really the approach that I take. And that's why I consider myself more of a teacher rather than a trainer. Because if I teach you PowerShell, and then you are introduced to a new task, your boss says, hey, I need X. Well, Jeff never trained me on X, but he taught me PowerShell, and I know enough PowerShell. I know how it works. I can figure this out and get it done. You can't do that if you're just trained to do something. Now, this may just seem like, just simple wordplay or semantics, but really it's not. Because I think if you keep it in your head, if you're training versus teaching, this really will affect your mindset and kind of subconsciously affect how you approach this task. Really, anyone can teach. And I should have grabbed, now that I see this slide here, I should have grabbed the Ratatouille graphic from the movie Ratatouille with the chef rat, whose thing is, from his human inspiration, his human idol, is that anyone can cook. Well, really, anyone can teach, is what I'll say. That teaching can be really nothing more than answering a question for someone, or in a form or somewhere. That's teaching. It might be some casual one-on-one mentoring that you're doing with a colleague or someone. Maybe you're going to do a little lunch hour presentation for people at work. Maybe, ideally, you'll do a user group meeting. Doug's always looking for people. There are lots of user groups around, literally around the world. Nowadays, we're doing so much virtually, so it's not like you have to go anywhere. You don't have to invest a lot of time. You don't have to even stand up in front of people, because like right now, I can't see anyone. So all I'm doing is just basically talking to myself, and maybe a lot of you do that already. So a user group presentation is kind of a way to teach. Once you do a couple of those, I encourage you, hey, maybe speak at an actual conference like the PowerShell Summit or a PowerShell Saturday event or a DevOps Day event, something even local. That also could be a way of teaching. And of course, you can do internal classroom training or full formal instructor-led training. No one has to do that thing or do all of those things or even the more advanced stuff. Again, even just answering a simple question, you're teaching PowerShell. The one thing I want to mention here, and I call this avoiding the black hole. And this is, again, based on all my years of experience in teaching PowerShell, all sorts of students, different levels, different companies, different countries, but there's always kind of some same principles or things that I see all the time in every class. One thing you need to be aware of, which I'm sure many of you already are, is that PowerShell obviously is very powerful. It's flexible, it's extensible, it's variable. It really can be a lot of different things and means a lot of different things to different people. You have your way of what you think PowerShell is, but when you're teaching someone, they may have their own mindset about, oh, this is what PowerShell is. So it means different things to different people. It means one thing for like Doug. Doug's a developer type. So his approach to PowerShell and the way that he might teach it is going to be a little bit different than the way that I would teach it coming from an IT pro perspective. Now that might also affect then who he's talking to. So if Doug is trying to teach PowerShell to another developer, yeah, he might approach it in one way. If he's trying to teach PowerShell to someone who's an IT pro, he might do it a different way. And same thing for me. So it means different things to different people. And you kind of have to take that into account when you are trying to decide, how am I going to teach this thing called PowerShell? Regardless of any of that, when you are teaching, you need to step back from whatever preconception that person might have and focus on what I call the critical fundamentals. And I'm going to go through some of these. So forget the fact that someone may be using PowerShell because they want to manage Azure or AWS or something like that. For them to really get to that point, they have to understand, and you have to teach them some very important fundamentals. This is really super important because PowerShell, and Jeffrey Snover has said this repeatedly, PowerShell is a glue language. It's used to tie a lot of different technologies together. You learn it once and you can apply it anywhere. So again, come back to my training thing. I'm not going to train someone on how to use the O365 commandlets or how to train them on how to use the Azure commandlets. Once you learn PowerShell, then it doesn't matter whether you're using the Azure commandlets or the PowerCLI commandlets, because it's still PowerShell. So that's why I say it's important to focus on the fundamentals and just learn PowerShell and think about PowerShell as its own thing. And once you learn it, then you can apply it and stick all sorts of other stuff together. That's the glue part.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
Question in the chat room. So someone's asking, is that similar to knowing your audience?
It is similar to knowing your audience. It's not so much that your approach might change, although it might. You might, if I'm teaching PowerShell to a room full of developer types, I'm probably going to have different examples or maybe couch my presentation in slightly different language. But yeah, that's certainly probably a good way to summarize that. Yeah, know your audience.
Yeah, good. Great.
First and foremost, regardless of the audience, if they really want to learn PowerShell, PowerShell is a command shell. You must, and again, this is based on my going on 20 years, pretty soon 20 years of PowerShell training. Focus on mastering PowerShell from the command prompt. If you can't type a command or a PowerShell expression, you will never be able to write a PowerShell script. Well, you'll never be able to write a PowerShell script effectively. And by that, I don't mean going out to TechNet or someone's blog and copying and pasting a bit of code and hammering away at it and trying to get it to work. Sure, you can do that, but you're going to spend a lot of time because you don't know PowerShell. You don't know how it works. So you have to be able to run commands from the command prompt. You can't script. if you don't understand that process. I also encourage you, if you're teaching, and again, teaching can be a lot of different things here, don't necessarily focus on long and complex pipeline expressions. Now, I'm assuming when I'm talking about teaching, by the way, that we're teaching beginners. If I'm teaching, obviously, an advanced topic, yeah, then I'm going to use more advanced things. But I'm kind of talking about teaching PowerShell to someone who is just getting started. So by my last point here about not using complex expressions, you kind of want to build something. So you run a command like get process. Have the user, the person you're teaching, make sure they understand what that command is really doing. Not just, I type this command and I see this result, but what is it doing under the hood? Then you want to add the next part. Yeah, so I'm going to get all those process objects and I'm going to filter them using where object. And I'm going to filter those where the working set size is greater than 10 megabytes. Okay, then what do I get? Well, I'm going to then pipe that to another command, sort object, and then we sort on the working set property and do it in descending order. And then lastly, I'm going to select the first 5 objects from the pipeline. Now, this is getting borderline complex, but what I would do is exactly what I just did, one step at a time. Don't give someone the entire expression here that you see on the screen and then try to teach that. Teach it one step at a time. The most important thing is they must understand what these commands are doing and that PowerShell is working with objects in the pipeline. If they can't understand, an expression like this and know what PowerShell is doing at each step of the way, they're never really going to get very far in PowerShell. So that's the most fundamental, most important part of teaching PowerShell, especially to someone new, for them to understand. And this is a big deal for a lot of people because a lot of, especially IT pros, think, oh, I'm not a developer. And so they put up their own barriers saying, yeah, I can't understand this object thing. It's too, developer-y. No, that's not true at all. So you may have to do some other things, which I'll show you a little bit later, to kind of what I call thinking outside the box. So objects most important, build slowly. Don't try to give them everything all at once, baby steps, building blocks. Once they understand objects in the pipeline, and there's really no particular order for some of these things because you're going to teach them objects in the pipeline with some other things here, my fundamental number 2. There are a set of PowerShell commandlets that a beginner needs to know how to master. They need to know, for example, how to use get help. If they can't get help on a commandlet and understand what they're seeing, you may have to teach them how to interpret the syntax, show them how to read the examples, show them what the different type things mean. They have to be able to use help, and don't forget the about topics. They have to be able to use get command. So how can I find, the boss has said, hey, I need you to, to find all the Hyper-V virtual machines that we have running in our environment, and then build an HTML report. If they don't know how to find the commands and then find the help in how to use those commands, they're never going to be able to achieve that task. You can't train someone on every possible thing you can do with PowerShell. That's impossible. But you can teach them so that they can teach themselves. Get help, get command, get member, obviously is the third of like the holy trinity. Really, these 3 are absolutely essential. If they don't know how to use these and what these mean, they're really going to struggle with PowerShell. The last commandlet that I would add to this list, though, is select object. This also reinforces the object nature, the importance of objects in the PowerShell and in the PowerShell pipeline. If someone who's new to PowerShell, if they have some competency with these 4 commands, they can pretty much do anything in PowerShell. Now, it may take them a little bit longer than it might take you, who has a little more experience, but if they understand the object in the pipeline and know how to use these commands, they will survive and they can continue to grow. So,
Hey, Jim,
yeah, go ahead.
a couple more questions. Chris is asked, when working with people who are new to PowerShell, do you think it's still a good idea to start with talking about the verb noun syntax and talk a bit about the verbs before digging into commands in the pipeline?
I don't think there's necessarily a hard order there. You're going to talk about commands, and then you mention commands, by the way, have a verb-noun naming convention. How you teach, how to use get command, whether then you bring up verb-noun, that's kind of up to you. Learning, the fact that it's verb-noun is not essential information, but it comes along as you're teaching these other core concepts. There's lots of things like that that you have no choice but to talk about, and they just naturally then are taught to someone new. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And Jeremy said, how would you explain what exactly an object is? I don't know if that's a whole talk on itself, but.
Well, it is. Hold on to that thought. I've got something I'll show you later in the presentation that might help with that.
Great. Okay.
So when we need to teach someone PowerShell, there are a number of things that you could do to facilitate the process, make it easier for people. It's very important that you try to remove obstacles. Sometimes it's a mental obstacle, sometimes it's a physical obstacle, but you want to make it easy and fun for someone to learn, because that's, if we are relaxed and it's easier to learn. So as you are teaching, for example, if you're teaching someone, how to use get command, in the process of teaching them get command, introduce the idea of tab completion. Show them how you can do tab completion for parameters, or when you get to talking about looking at like get service and the name parameter and it's positional and all the values come automatically. Well, show them tab completion and kind of teach them, tab completion, for one, gets rid of the need to type everything, because that certainly scares a lot of people, that they feel I can't type and they're hunting, pecking, and it takes them a long time. If they get in the habit of tab completion, that removes a very important obstacle. Same thing with using things like PS read line, like the Alt tab to do all the parameter completion, or learn and teach them the Control R that allows you to search your command history. These are all little incidental things that you can do. I'm not saying you need to make these actual targets of what you want to teach, but using these things will help remove some of the obstacles and make it easier for someone to learn PowerShell. Show them how to use the PowerShell history, how to get history and also invoke history. Don't be afraid of aliases like H and R. I think it's important, and I do this in my classes as well. Take a few minutes and show them how to configure the console. You want to make it so that it's easy for them to see and to use. It might mean adjusting the font size, or one thing I like to do is show people how to change the error color. So instead of being red, which is sometimes hard to read for one, and a lot of people see red and they instantly turn it off, change it to yellow or green. And then if you do get an error, then it's a little bit easier to read. Doesn't scare you as much. These little things really can make a big difference in, again, removing these obstacles. I like changing the font size. I'm an old man now, and I need to, in my terminals, I need to make my font size big so that I can actually see the screen. You probably might need to do the same thing. Again, this is kind of knowing your audience, but it seems like a silly thing, but the more comfortable someone is in using PowerShell, the easier it will be for them to learn it. I would also then introduce now the Windows terminal, because that makes things really nice in terms of adjusting font size and making it easy to read and see, and having multiple tabs. Not necessarily PowerShell per se, obviously, but I think going forward, Windows Terminal is going to be what we will all be using. Remember, I'm just focusing on using PowerShell from the command prompt. VS Code doesn't come into play here at all because we're not doing any scripting. I'm just talking about helping someone learn how to use PowerShell from the console and understand the principles and concepts of PowerShell. And because of that, aliases in the console are okay. So if you want to teach someone H and R and GSV, that's fine. Although you could also reinforce the idea that, you've got tab completion, so it's just as easy to type and tab complete the command to do get-se tab and have that autocomplete to get service as opposed to use GSV. Regardless, if you want to use aliases to make things easier, go right ahead. Personally, I would avoid the % symbol and the question mark aliases because to me, those are super cryptic. And I think people grab onto those as crutches and make that part of the language. I would, when you get to talk about objects, and for example, if you're trying to teach them for each object, use the actual commandlet or the alias for each. I personally, I'm not a big fan of the punctuation symbol aliases. Other than that, though, aliases are fine in the console.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
That's a great list. I just wanted to hone in on the Control R. I've worked with a bunch of people teaching them new stuff, and it would be painful for me to watch them retyping stuff at the command line over and over to the point that I would just say things like, I'm going to say a bad word here. I would say, just Control R that shit.
Yeah.
And to the point that people were going to get me a t-shirt that said that.
Yeah, that's good.
Control R is great.
Yeah, and it took me the longest time to adopt the PS readline module and mindset, and now it's just second nature to me.
Mm-hmm.
Again,
Exactly.
it's one of those things, just take away that obstacle. Yeah, I've seen a lot of people struggle when they're teaching, when they're trying to learn PowerShell, because they struggle typing. And part of that is, I got to redo the command. You could also show them the up and down arrow to move back as well. Control R is nice if you have something that is further back. You could do that as well. Anything else?
All good.
All right. So as you're teaching, and remember, everything I'm saying, you could, when I say how to teach, you could also interpret that to mean how to learn, okay? So keep that in mind here. Patience is a virtue. We all started out knowing nothing. You have to remember, and I'll admit this is a challenge for me sometimes because I've been doing PowerShell for so long. It is such an ingrained part of me. I mean, I dream and sleep and do PowerShell work in my head, in my dreams. I'm that pathetic. Because I'm so fluent in it and I don't even have to think about it, sometimes it's a challenge for me if I'm helping a beginner to remember what it was like when I was first learning PowerShell and trying to struggle. Okay, right host, right output. Yeah, I just don't get it. So you have to be patient. Remember what it was like, when you were at that level and you were just in your first week of learning PowerShell and everything felt overwhelming and intimidated and you had no idea what you were doing, thinking, oh, what am I doing? So patience, absolutely important. Visualization is a skill that it's easier to say, you can't really teach visualization, although I try what I can to emphasize it. I have found that both for myself and also for teaching people, if someone can visualize what PowerShell is doing, like go back to my get process example from a couple slides ago. If someone can visualize or even just verbally describe in plain English what that expression is doing, they will have a better understanding of what PowerShell is and how it works. So going back to the objects, okay, so one thing, you visualize an object, okay? So you visualize a piece of fruit, okay? So a fruit has properties, things that describe it, right? Color, is it edible? Does it have seeds? Its weight, those types of things. And then there are things that we could do to that fruit. We can eat it, we can mash it, we can pare it, we can slice it, we can dice it, whatever you want to do. So helping someone visualize, and sometimes that means stepping out of PowerShell, but if they can visualize, or if you can help them visualize even better, I think you'll find that learning PowerShell and teaching PowerShell is much easier. Commandlets and parameters. I'm trying to remember what I had in mind here. You need to teach them how to use the commandlets and obviously how to work with parameters. This is where that tab completion comes into play. Absolutely learning how to read the help and understand the help. You know, back when I started teaching PowerShell in V1, there were like 200 something commandlets. Now, I haven't run it lately because I'm just rebuilding a new machine. I don't have the Azure commandlets, but I probably have close to 10,000 commands on my system. There's no way I can learn 10,000 commands. I could kind of learn, you know, a couple hundred back in the days of V1, but I can't do that anymore. And it's impossible for you to train someone on all those commandlets. But what you can teach them is how to find commandlets, how to use commandlets, how to get what they need. Again, make it easy. Things like tab completion or the alt tab with the PS read line. I find it easier, and if you remember, go back to my get process example, I use full parameter names. I would encourage you, if you're teaching, and even if you're learning PowerShell, take advantage of things like tab completion and use the full parameter name. Use the full commandlet name, use the full parameter name. That way, that reinforces in your head what it is that PowerShell is doing. There's no mystery there because the commandlets and parameter names are very plain, right? It's dash computer name. It's not dash C. It's much easier to learn that way and then realize, okay, I understand how this works. Now to simplify things, I can use aliases. I can take advantage of positional parameters. It's easier to take stuff away than try to learn the short way and then realize, oh, now I have to add this parameter. So very important to focus on that. Do the full boat. It's really not that hard with tab completion. Much easier to pare things down and to make things simpler than it is to add it. I would also encourage you to not do something like this. So if I want to say, yeah, I need all the names of the services, this is perfectly valid PowerShell. And you might be tempted to teach someone, oh yeah, you just type this. That would be more of a training approach. Instead, focus on the process, the PowerShell pipeline. What is PowerShell doing? Well, I'm going to do get services, and I'm going to select all of the objects, the service objects, and I want to expand on the name property. This will also be a good way to kind of reinforce and recover the idea of objects and properties and whatnot. Once they understand this, then then you can go back if you need to and show them, you know, the get service in parentheses .name, because then they'll kind of understand, oh, get service is running. I'm getting a bunch of objects, and then I just want to get the .name property or the name property using dot notation, and PowerShell makes it easier for me. If you teach them the shortcut, all you've done is teach them a shortcut. They don't understand why it works, or they probably don't. Some people might, but whereas if you take the time and make sure they understand the fundamentals, it's much easier to start big and then go small. So this comes to my third fundamental, what I call clarity is critical. It needs to be clear what PowerShell is doing. The get service pipe to select object expand property name is really clear. There's no misunderstanding, and if need be, I could go to the help and see, okay, what's expand property do? Whereas if I'm totally new to PowerShell and I see get service parentheses dot name, I'm not quite sure I know what's going on there. I may see, oh, it works, but I don't know why. And again, we're not training, we want to teach. I'm a big believer in, again, I mentioned visualization, and sometimes you do need to teach outside the box. One thing that I have, and you're welcome to use this, I'll give you the link here at the end here. I have found that sometimes when I'm teaching PowerShell, and we have to use, commands like get service and get event log and get process or whatnot, sometimes people get kind of sidetracked or distracted by the technology. They focus more on the services and the processes, and it's easy to get distracted. Remember I said PowerShell is a glue language. You learn it once, you can apply it to anything. So I wrote a module called PS Teaching Tools, and it has a set of commandlets that work with vegetable objects. So you can run get vegetable, sort on the objects. You can, in my example, format the table. You could use these objects and these commandlets to teach all sorts of PowerShell, because you can teach about objects and properties and how you get member and grouping and sorting and filtering. And you're working with a non-technology object. It's a vegetable. Because all I want to teach you or teach my students is PowerShell concepts. So now I have kind of a non-tech way that I can reinforce the concepts. And then I can say, okay, so you see how this works with vegetables. Now let's do it with services or processes or an Active Directory user account. That really, I think, goes a long way in reinforcing the idea that, yeah, PowerShell is learn it once, apply it anywhere. Because, as you see on the screen there, the get, sort, format table, it could be any object. It could be a service, could be a process, could be an Exchange mailbox. It could be a SharePoint site. It could be anything. So those kind of things, I think, can help you teach outside the box. You don't have to use this module. You may just want to have physical props to kind of indicate, like a real fruit. Okay, here's an orange. And you can see I've got a bunch of oranges. I've done this in some of my really early classes years ago, where I would have the class, kind of line up, and we would kind of simulate a pipeline, and they would get the objects, and I'd have them sort and filter and group. And don't assume that everything you do just has to be at the console. Sometimes you have to be a little creative. So I have found this to be a quite useful tool. To learn PowerShell, to kind of flip the coin here briefly, although everything I've talked about so far on how to teach PowerShell can kind of apply in how to learn, you have to be open. I have found that the people who struggle the most in my classes are those people who come to PowerShell with a preconceived notion about what PowerShell is or how it should behave. They'll see PowerShell and go, oh yeah, that looks like X. I know X. And then when PowerShell doesn't behave like X, they think, oh, PowerShell is sexist, this is awful, I'm never going to learn this. And yes, that's going to be true, because PowerShell is not like X. PowerShell is built upon lots of different technologies that kind of look like something you may know, but it's PowerShell. It's its own thing. So you have to be open to learning the PowerShell way. Set aside any preconceptions you have about what you think PowerShell is it better or worse than Bash, is all that nonsense, because that just gets in the way of learning. And if you're teaching PowerShell, you have to be able to, and actually these people are pretty easy to identify, to find ways to help them get over those preconceptions. That's probably another big hurdle, an obstacle that you're going to have to knock down. Be open to learning PowerShell for what it is. And that's why I focus so much on running PowerShell and learning PowerShell from the command prompt. I can't tell you how many times I've been in class and people will ask questions, say, hey, what would happen if I do? I said, well, I don't know, just do it. We're in a lab environment, we're in a classroom environment. You're not going to break anything. Worst absolute case is we just reload your machine, okay? So don't wonder, I wonder what would happen if I do this. Do it, find out. I mean, obviously I would hope you're not doing PowerShell in a production environment. You're not trying out an Active Directory commandlet on your 10,000 user AD domain, running as domain admin. Set up a virtual machine, build up a test domain, and test it there, and just try it. That's the only way you're going to find out what PowerShell does, is by actually doing it. Again, this visualization, I think, is really important and helpful. Try to visualize what it is that PowerShell is going to do, or what it is that you want PowerShell to do. Don't try to write or come up with, if it's a pipeline expression, I need PowerShell to do A and then B and then C. Don't try to write A, B, and C together all at once. Write A, get the result, pipe it then to B, and then add the next part. Over time, your PowerShell skills will increase and you'll be able to write A and B first and then C. And then, you'll get to the point where, oh yeah, I can just bang out A, B, C with no problem. But it only works because you have built up those visualization and those PowerShell muscles to understand and internalize what PowerShell is doing. And I guess that's what's happened with me over the 10 plus years I've been doing PowerShell, as I have internalized it so much that I just do PowerShell without even thinking about it. And ideally, you will reach that point too, but it will take time. You have to read everything. You need to read the help. You need to read blogs. You need to read the error messages. You need to read books, anything and everything you can. And don't be afraid to reread the same topic from two different people. If I write a blog post on how to use get service, and Doug writes a blog post on how to use get service, read them both. Because yes, there might be some overlap. That's fine. Repetition obviously is a typical learning technique. But more than likely, we are also going to we will introduce additional information that you may not get if you don't read both of them. Because I'm going to have one idea go, oh yeah, you need to know this when you're running get service. And Doug may have something else in mind to say, oh yeah, when you're running get service, keep this in mind. So by doing both of those, you get the repetition, and then you pick up something new. And even just the way that different authors and teachers present material, the way that they write their examples, or the way that they describe something. You may read something where I'm describing some PowerShell concept or principle, and you just can't understand it. But then you read Doug's version and go, oh, well, that makes sense to me. So don't be afraid to say, oh yeah, I already know that. You need to read and reread everything all the time. And that's even true for me, by the way. I always have to reread the help, especially now with PowerShell 7, because there's so much coming out. There's new parameters and new commands and stuff that doesn't necessarily get a lot of publicity or notice in the community unless someone talks about it or discovers it. So if you don't read the help, for example, you won't know, oh, here's a new command. Oh, here's a new parameter. Oh, that makes my job so much easier. I ran into this years ago, back in like the PowerShell v4 days. I think I know, how this command works, and I'm trying to solve a problem. I'm writing a script and go, I just can't figure out how this works. Fine, I'll go read the help. And I go look at the help. Lo and behold, there's a new parameter that was introduced that made what I was trying to do, that solved it immediately. I think there's even an example that said, oh, well, that's what I'm trying to do. It's right there. But because it was a command that I thought I knew, I never bothered to go back and reread the help. But the solution for what was bugging me was right there. So you have to read the help, reread the help, read everything, and then repeat the whole process. You have to use and do PowerShell, read everything. Don't be afraid to repeat. Repetition is a great way to learn. So one of the things that you can do is learn to learn PowerShell, to really learn it, is to practice, excuse me, is to practice it. Do something with it every day. Years ago, back in the, it might have been in PowerShell V2 days, I was teaching a class for a Western state. It was a intro class to PowerShell, and it's one of the few times where I got really ill, like on Tuesday. It was a 5-day class, and we had to cancel the class. And I spent the next 3 days just curled up in the hotel room waiting to get better so I could fly home. We rescheduled the class like 6 months later. So I come in and say, okay, how many of you have been, trying to learn and use PowerShell? No one had touched it in 6 months. So maybe that's understandable, but I basically had to start all over again. Learning PowerShell is like learning a foreign language. If the boss came to you and said, hey, we have a new office that we're opening in Hungary, and you've been appointed the liaison, but they only speak Hungarian, you're going to have to learn Hungarian. The only way you're going to learn Hungarian is by immersing yourself in it and using it every day. PowerShell is no different. So you have to use it every day. At the very least, look at help for a random topic. So the first command I have here on the slide will get a random command and then get the help for that command and shows the online help. Even if you do nothing else, but every day read help, that's something. And also the same thing for an about topic. At the very least, if you do nothing else, if you can't get your time to actually write a PowerShell command or do something, actually type commands, read help at the very least. And here are 2 little one-line commands that you can run on a daily basis. You could put them in a script if you wanted even and say, oh, here's my daily PowerShell. Do this over lunch, over a coffee break. It only takes you a couple minutes. All of this will help. Some resources to help you out here. My PS Teaching Tools module is up on GitHub. You can also just install it from the PowerShell gallery. My blog is listed there, so if you obviously want to learn more about PowerShell, that's where I hang my shingle. The Learn Windows PowerShell in a month of Learn Windows PowerShell in a month of lunches has been amazingly, and a little humbled by this, kind of been deemed the de facto standard for a lot of people in learning PowerShell. I know that they're working on a new version that's learning, Linux PowerShell, basically the new PowerShell 7 in a month of lunches. The thing about PowerShell is that the fundamentals don't really change. Objects in the pipeline, commandlets, parameters, get help, get command, select object. That doesn't matter whether you're running Windows PowerShell or PowerShell 7 on a Linux platform. Sure, some of the details might vary, but the PowerShell fundamentals don't change. So a lot of people find learning the Spanning book, Learn Windows PowerShell in a Month of Lunches, to be a great help to them. I have also written, and I had a screen picture of this earlier, a book that I'm calling the PowerShell Practice Primer. Because what I found was that a lot of people, they went through the Month of Lunches books, which has exercises, but then they say, I don't know what to do with PowerShell. I know I need to use it every day, but we're not using it a lot, or I don't have any projects. So the PowerShell Practice Primer is 100 exercises. They start really simple. There's no scripting with them. They're just a very simple thing like how many commands you have on your system. And you then have to figure out how to do that. And write a little PowerShell expression to accomplish that task. So there are 100 exercises. If you are really experienced, you can probably fly through them quickly and really validate what you know. If you get the book from LeanPub, there's also a download file that in essence has the questions all in a PS1 file with commented sections with the question and the hint. So you can basically open it up in VS Code, the PowerShell IC, keep notes, and then put your command in, get it to work. And when you're done, save the file. Then you have the questions and your answers, which you can then always go back and look to. I'm also going to point out here, this is something that Doug's been working on. Give him a plug for his tiny PowerShell projects. It's kind of a similar idea where you have to, here's a challenge, here's a little task for you to do, and then solve that with PowerShell. When we're done here, if Doug wants to talk a bit more about that, we can. But that would be another opportunity for you to put your PowerShell knowledge to use.
Hey, Jeff, that's really funny because as you were talking, going through this list, I went on to GitHub to look for my tiny PowerShell project. So thanks for plugging that. Much appreciated.
I would also encourage you as a resource is the #PowerShell tag on social media, primarily Twitter. Now, I know some people, they're not into Twitter, they can't use Twitter, they don't like Twitter. That's fine. If you at least follow the hashtag, you will find out what people are doing, what is new in PowerShell. You'll find out about events and meetings. You really can't learn PowerShell. I mean, yes, you can learn PowerShell on your own, but to really learn it and to really get the most out of it, I would encourage you to take advantage and become a part of the PowerShell community. As Doug will attest to, the PowerShell community is extremely large, extremely enthusiastic, and everyone in the community wants to help people succeed. And so people are constantly sharing information, and that #PowerShell tag is a great way to keep on top of that, or to ask your question, hey, what's a good resource for learning X? Tag that on Twitter and include the #PowerShell, because personally, I pretty much just follow a few people and I filter and just go on tags because there's just so much noise otherwise. That helps me narrow things down, and it also helps me keep on top of what's new and what's happening and what should I be paying attention to. One other thing here, there's another thing here with PowerShell, which I guess I'll mention. On the first Friday of every month, I host on Twitter a kind of an open chat from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time. We use the #PS tweet chat, and then people just chat about what's going on in PowerShell, ask questions, things they're learning, sharing information. But again, if you follow that #PowerShell hashtag, you'll be alerted to about these Friday events. So those are some good resources that I would recommend to people. On my blog, by the way, there is a page of what I call essential PowerShell resources. Years ago, people would say, oh, what book should I use? What video should I watch? What order should I do things? So I wrote that essential PowerShell page to give people kind of a starting point to what I thought they might want to use in order to learn and teach PowerShell. So if you have more questions, want to follow up here, you can find me and follow me on Twitter. Again, my blog and my GitHub repo. And at some point, I will post a link that will have a copy of my presentation here. So if you follow me on Twitter, I'll figure out where I'm going to post this. And with that, I think we have some time for questions, and maybe I'll come up with some good answers. And then when we're done with that, then we'll stop the recording and I'll give away some stuff. So questions. Hopefully you found that interesting. Or Doug, if you want to add anything else about your tiny PowerShell projects.
That was a great presentation. Yes, we'll keep an eye on the chat. Thanks for the I'll take the screen for a quick second and
Yeah, you can take it back completely because that's the last slide.
okay. So yeah, if the people want to hear about it, I've been actually thinking of doing a presentation on this, and some people want. We'll put the link back to the screen in a second if people want to see the links. But I'll also post those when I send out where the link is for the video that we recorded. I'll get the links from Jeff and I'll post them in there and on the YouTube page. So just a real quick thing. Thanks, Jeff, again for bringing up the Tiny PowerShell projects. This was a book written by a gentleman. He wrote all the stuff in Python, and he did a really interesting approach. He actually wrote up all these examples, and at the same time, not only was he writing the examples to show how to work with Python, but he also wrote an easy way to do testing so that as you produced your own solutions, you could actually side by side use the solution that comes with that works, and then you can add your own solutions to make your own tweaks to it, and then you can run tests against it. I thought it was a really neat way of presenting concepts and then letting people work with Pester inside of PowerShell. So there's about 22 examples, and it goes from simple all the way down to actually playing tic-tac-toe interactively. So if you want to jump on that and grab it, and every one of these things show things like how to do string manipulations, how to work with parameters, how to work with regexes, and how to work with all different types of aspects within PowerShell. And it was quite interesting to see the parallel between the Python book as well as the PowerShell implementation. So I would highly recommend people jumping on this, checking it out, and it's up on GitHub. So if you want to add things to it, make corrections if there's needed, I think it's a cool way to teach people things.
Yeah, and I would add though a little caveat here is as cool as that is not something that I would teach someone or introduce to someone who's new to PowerShell.
100% correct. This is somewhat new. Like the first few examples are simple. Hello, crow's nest, and picnic. But yes, as soon as you get into what's Pester and how do you use it, and as soon as you get into like the Jump 5 puzzle, you start getting into some advanced techniques inside of PowerShell. So totally great. And somebody actually recommends PS Cones. Yep, PS Cones is another excellent tool out there to learn how to use PowerShell. I'm not sure. I haven't really used it, so I'm not sure if it's really good for beginners, intermediate, or.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it lately. I looked at it a while ago. Again, it's not something that I would use for a beginner, trying to teach them these fundamentals that I kind of harped on in my presentation. But when it comes to the point where, okay, I basically have the month of lunches equivalent knowledge, but now I need to learn, I need to use PowerShell every day, like Jeff says, then things like the PS Coans, or even starting down your Tiny PowerShell projects, then that becomes, or my PowerShell practice primer, those become then, viable next steps.
Makes total sense. Do you want to share your screen one more time?
Yep. Put that screen back up. Let me.
And then I'll stop the recording, and then we can do the.
Yeah. Okay, so I put that back up.
So if somebody wants to grab a screenshot of that for themselves, and okay, I'm going to stop the recording.
And go ahead and take I guess I can stop sharing.
All right.
So you should take the